Only one of the pieces in this concert actually started life as a ballet. But in a way, ballet, or the dance, is something that unites all three of them. The work that started out on the stage as a ballet, composed as a ballet, is Debussy's Prélude à l'après-midi d'une faune, Prelude to the Afternoon of a Faun. In those days, the word prelude had taken on a new significance, particularly since Chopin, who called a lot of pieces preludes. Before that, preludes were definitely preludes to something, preludes and fugues, preludes and toccatas, that sort of thing. But in this case, the idea of creating something that's a prelude to what? That was what Chopin, a great romantic, had been created. And Debussy loved this idea, and he really took it and ran with it in the Prelude. It's about a faun, not a faun in the sense of a young deer, but in a mythological creature, a half goat-like creature, very sensual creatures, very much associated with eroticism. And eroticism is very, very much at the heart of this piece. Not fervid, violent, intense eroticism, but a kind of languid eroticism. This faun is depicted, as it were, lying in the sun, and he dreams, erotic dreams, as he lies there. And yet in the end, although he experiences this intense longing, in the end, what he does is surrender to the beauty of the sun and to the warmth and to the glory of the Mediterranean landscape and fall asleep. And we fall asleep, as it were, with him, not knowing whether those dreams have been fulfilled or not. If that sounds frustrating, well, don't worry, because this piece is one of the most incredible, sensually beautiful things ever written. It also has an astonishing quality. If you think that this is 1894, when Brahms's music was still considered modern by a lot of people, that it has this astonishing, almost timeless quality, as though Debussy has been able to write music that floats free of any regular beat. You think how important the regular beat is in a lot of classical music. The opening of the prelude just drifts in and out almost timelessly. It's the sort of thing you associate more with New Age music, and yet he's created this effect in the most beautiful orchestral colors, spellbinding orchestral colors. It's like stepping into a dream the moment the piece starts. And in a way, you don't really need to know more about it than that. Just let the music, the current of the dreams, like the logic of dreams, carry you through to a gorgeous rapt climax in the middle, and then finally to the sun-drenched, peaceful ending. Just one thing to point out, Debussy uses two instruments in this that, as far as I know, have never been used in classical music before: tuned cymbals. Debussy had been very impressed when he'd been to the Great Exhibition in Paris a little before he wrote this piece, and had seen demonstrations of instruments and musicians from Far Eastern cultures, particularly from Bali and China. And these echoed throughout his music in later life. And the tuned cymbals, which you hold up and gently tap each other with so that they ring, were something that left a deep impression. And in the final pages of this piece, they're there gently, quietly, contributing to the strange, warm luminescence of this piece. After that comes Prokofiev's Violin Concerto No. 2, written in 1935. The year before, to the amazement of some people, he decided to return to Russia and into the arms of Stalin's Soviet Union. This was a time when a lot of composers, like his compatriot Shostakovich, were having a very hard time under Stalin's repressive measures. There were show trials, people were disappearing all over the place, and the strictures about what you could and couldn't write, what was considered good socialist music, were getting firmer and more intolerant and hard line. And yet the Russians seem to have made a great job of coaxing Prokofiev back. In fact, the next year, Shostakovich fell into disgrace. And it may even have been that that was part of the thing. Well, let's get Prokofiev back and play him off against Shostakovich. It won't do either of them any harm. That also accounts for something interesting. The second violin concerto has a distinctly Russian folky feeling. The first theme you hear at the beginning of the piece actually could almost be a Russian folk song. Obviously, Prokofiev was deeply, deeply homesick. It does seem that Russians seem to find exile particularly painful. He was yearning for the motherland, perhaps, and that comes out in this music. Also, perhaps, in the exquisite slow movement. Like Tchaikovsky, Prokofiev had an amazing ability to unwind long, beautiful melodies that seem to go on evolving endlessly. And the slow movement of this concerto is a great example of that. But as I said, there's a ballet connection too, because throughout this piece, you can hear dance music. Even not just when it's fast music in the first movement or in the finale, which has some very interestingly complicated rhythms, 5 in a bar, for instance, but that slow movement too, that melodic movement, is an extraordinarily dance-like quality. It has a very simple waltz-like figure in the accompaniment, and it's actually been staged as a ballet because it has that kind of invitation to the dance quality about it. There's something about the way Prokofiev uses his rhythms that makes you want to move along with him physically. I think that's one of the reasons why he's still so extraordinarily popular. And it's definitely observable in this. And it's no surprise to consider that only a short while after this, he was going on to go on and write the ballet Romeo and Juliet, which many people would say is possibly the greatest ballet ever composed. Finally, Beethoven's Seventh Symphony, an abstract piece of music, orchestral music. What's this got to do with the dance? Well, plenty. Wagner, who loved this symphony, once described it as the apotheosis of the dance. And it's not often you find a program note that doesn't quote that somewhere, because it's so extraordinarily appropriate. Even though the 4 movements are strongly contrasted, each of them has a very strong dance element in it. Even the, in inverted commas, slow movement, da, 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 with its famous repeated note tune, it's something you can imagine dancing along to quite slowly. And the outer movements are incredibly full of dance energy. At the same time, Beethoven does something which is quite interesting, because no composer had done this in symphonies to the extent that Beethoven did before, which is he draws elements together in the different contrasting movements of the symphony so that you feel that one drama is going on all the way through. I mean, it's rather like in the Symphony No. 5, for instance, with its famous opening. Every movement of that symphony has a da-da-da-da rhythm of one kind or another. So it's almost like watching the adventures of a hero in a novel or a film and seeing how he or she changes according to the adventures that they encounter on the way. In this symphony, you'll notice that there's a rhythm that occurs quite early on in the slow introduction to the first movement. Da-dum-dum, 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 da-dum-dum. Or it starts very simply as da-dum, da-dum, da-dum-dum, da-dum-dum. And that rhythm dominates the first movement. And all the way through the symphony, almost all the major themes are made up under a pattern of 2 short notes on 1 long note. Dum, dum, da. For instance, the slow movement, da, 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 da. And the finale with its incredible pounding dance rhythm, yum da-da-lum, dum da-da-lum, 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 da-da-lum. You hear it all the time. It's an idea that, as it were, obsesses the entire piece. And part of its virtuosity is Beethoven's showing just how many different variations he can work on this rhythmic pattern. It's also a piece that seems, well, it has its dark moments, certainly, but in the end, joy and life seem to be triumphant. That may be partly because of what happened around the time Beethoven wrote it in 1811 to 12. He'd been quite seriously ill. I mean, apart from his famous deafness, Beethoven was often tried by serious physical afflictions of all sorts, as well as by serious depression. And he'd been for a rest cure at a spa called Teplitz, which was well known as a neutral place in the middle of what was then the convulsiveness of the European Napoleonic Wars. Diplomats used to meet there because it was safe. He really enjoyed the rest cure. He really enjoyed the piece. And he came away with plans for 3 symphonies, the first of which, 7 and 8, he wrote almost immediately, and the third of which, the 9th, wasn't to be finished until nearly 12 years later. That was how long it fermented. But the ideas, the seeds were planted then. If this symphony is anything, it's about that exhilaration of feeling that you're getting better. I'm sure all of us have known this, what it's like to be really quite seriously or badly ill for a long time. When you start to feel that you're getting better, that sense of joy of life returning. Thank heavens I can walk again. My energy is coming back. Or I'm beginning to feel my mood lifting or whatever else. That quality is there throughout this symphony. Yes, there are moments when Beethoven seems to turn back into the darkness again and remember what it is that he's been through. But life is triumphant. Just a little technical point. I know people's eyes often glaze over when I start talking about tonality, but tonality is one of the key elements in music. This symphony is in A major, very bright key. But all the way through the symphony, there's a constant tendency to it to move towards a darker major key, F. They're quite remote, aren't they? It's as though F is trying to pull Beethoven back from A major brightness into the darkness he knew before. And the real showdown is in the last few minutes of the symphony, where there's a sort of moment where the cellos and basses descend lower and lower. And then they end up on F. And then it's F to E. And A major beckons again. Brightness at last again, as Beethoven rams home that A major in the final moments of this symphony. He writes, well, up till then, the loudest you could write in a piece of music, and composers didn't do it all that often, was FF, fortissimo, as loud as possible. Beethoven writes FFF, louder than as loud as possible, fortissimo. I don't think it's exactly the first time anyone's ever done it, but it's certainly the first time everyone's ever used it in an orchestral effect. And it's almost like he's telling the orchestra, blow your brains out. It's that kind of piece. It's this real sense of, is the return of life inevitable? Is it something you have to will? Does it require sheer determination to get back to health? Both, perhaps. And yet the exhilaration of having got there is one of the things that makes the end of this symphony so marvelous and so positive. And my wife and I both think we'd take it to a desert island, because if we found ourselves slipping back into gloom on a desert island, Beethoven's Seventh is definitely the piece that would bring us back to health and happiness.